My family hates my fiancée for no reason. My mom grabbed her arm at the dinner table and told her to leave. Not asked. Grabbed. And Jasmine didn't move. She just looked at my mother's hand on her wrist, then looked at me. And in that single second, I understood that no matter what I did next, something was going to break. The only question was what. By the end of this story, you will understand exactly why my family did what they did, and you will not be able to decide whether to hate them or forgive them. Because neither will I. That dinner was 6 weeks before our wedding, and it wasn't the first time. It was just the first time I finally stopped pretending I didn't see it. The invitation fight started in February. My mom called me on a Tuesday morning, which she never does. She works from home. She drinks her coffee on the back porch until 9 and doesn't speak to anyone before then. So when my phone rang at 7:52 a.m. and her name was on the screen, I already knew. She didn't say hello. She said, "Your father and I need to talk to you about the guest list." I said, "Good morning to you too, Mom." She said, "Don't." Just that. Don't. That single word had 14 years of history in it. Every time I dated someone she didn't approve of, every time I'd pushed back on her opinion, every time I'd chosen my own life over her expectations. All of it packed into that one syllable. I asked what the problem was. She said Jasmine had put her mother on the list as a head table guest, right next to my parents. And she had done it without asking. I told her Jasmine's mother was coming from Phoenix, that she'd saved up money for the flight, that she was Jasmine's only living parent and the only family she had in the world. Of course, she was at the head table. My mom said, "She doesn't know us." I said, "Neither did Dad's side of the family when you married him." Silence. Then she said something I didn't expect. She said, "Marcus, you know this isn't about the seating chart." And she hung up. I sat with that for a while. I sat with it longer than I should have, because she was right. It was never about the seating chart. But I didn't call her back. I went to work. I didn't tell Jasmine. And that was my first mistake. Not the last, but the first. Let me back up 2 years without losing anything important. I met Jasmine at a work conference in Atlanta. She was there presenting a research paper on urban displacement. I was there because my company had sent me and I was bored. I walked into the wrong breakout session at 2 p.m. on a Thursday, and she was standing at the front of a room of 40 people, talking about a family in Chicago who'd lost their home, and then lost their community, and then lost their identity, all in the space of 18 months. She didn't use notes. She just talked, and the room was silent. I almost left. I should have left. I'd walked into the wrong room, and my session was down the hall. I stayed for 45 minutes. After, I introduced myself. She was packing up her laptop. She didn't look impressed by me. She asked what I did. I told her. She said, "Oh." Just like that. Just oh. I asked her to dinner anyway. She said she had plans. I asked for her card. She said she'd think about it. Then she handed me one. That was Jasmine. That was exactly Jasmine. Not playing games. Not performing indifference. Just genuinely busy, genuinely unimpressed, genuinely her own person. I had never in my life met someone who made me feel so immediately like I would have to actually earn something. We dated for a year before I introduced her to my family. That part was my fault. I knew it then. I know it now. I kept waiting for the right time. But the right time was just the story I told myself while I quietly kept the two parts of my life separated. Because somewhere underneath the excuses, I already suspected my family would do exactly what they later did. And I chose to let that be Jasmine's problem instead of solving it before it started. The first meeting was Thanksgiving. My brother Derek had suggested it. He's 3 years older than me, and he's always played the role of peacemaker in our family, which mostly means he defuses situations after my mother creates them and before my father has to get involved. He called me in October and said, "Just bring her. Rip the Band-Aid." I should have known that rip the Band-Aid was not a good omen for a first impression. Jasmine wore a burgundy dress. She brought a sweet potato pie she had made from scratch because she'd asked me what my family liked, and I'd told her my mom made sweet potato pie every year, and she had spent an entire Saturday trying to get the recipe right. I didn't tell her that until later. I should have told her that day. But I was watching my mom's face when Jasmine walked through the door carrying that dish, and I saw the thing I'd been afraid of. It wasn't anger. It was colder than anger. It was assessment. My mom looked at Jasmine the way you look at something you've already decided doesn't fit before you've even tried it on. A quick scan, a conclusion, and then a smile that landed half a second too late to be real. She said, "You must be Jasmine." Marcus has told us so little about you. Not a lot. Little. The word was a small blade, and my mother had placed it perfectly. Jasmine didn't flinch. She said, I hope I can change that today. She held out the pie. She said she hoped my mom didn't mind. She'd tried to match the family recipe. My mom took the dish without looking at it. She said, we'll have plenty of food. She put it on the counter, not the table. That dish never made it to the table. Dinner was painful in the way that polite warfare always is. Everything sounded normal from a distance. But up close, every question my mother asked Jasmine was designed to locate a weakness. Where did your family move from originally? What does your mother do? Did you always plan to stay in research, or did you end up there? Not questions to know her. Questions to map her. My dad was quiet through most of it. He asked Jasmine once about her work, and when she explained it, he nodded slowly and said, important work. That was all he said. But the way he said it, like he was surprised it was important, didn't sit right. My brother Derek tried. He genuinely tried. He asked Jasmine about Atlanta, about the conference circuit, about whether she'd watched the same show he'd been obsessed with. She lit up a little talking to Derek. For about 20 minutes, she seemed comfortable. Then my mom asked about the wedding. We weren't even engaged yet. We had been dating for a year. There was no ring. There had been no conversation. My mom asked, so are you two thinking about the future? A wedding? Family? The room went very quiet. I said, Mom. She said, I'm just asking. It's a normal question. It wasn't a normal question. It was a challenge. It was her way of saying, I know where this is going, and I want you to know that I know. Jasmine set her fork down. She looked at my mother directly, and she said, I think that's a conversation Marcus and I will have when we're ready. But I appreciate you caring about his future. Perfect. Patient. Polished. My mother smiled. Said, of course. On the drive home, Jasmine was quiet for almost 20 minutes. Then she said, she doesn't like me. I said she was just protective. Jasmine said, that's not what that was. She was right. I said she was wrong. And that was my second mistake. But that was nothing compared to what happened at Easter. Easter was 4 months later. By then, Jasmine and I had talked about moving in together. We were real. We were serious. And I had done something stupid out of love. I had told my mother. Not just that we were serious. I had told her that I was going to propose. That I had been looking at rings. That I was planning to do it in June, at the restaurant where we'd had our first real date. I told her because I thought it would help. I thought that if she knew how certain I was, she would start to accept it. I thought certainty would soften her. What it actually did was give her 4 months to build a case. Easter dinner. My Aunt Linda was there. My cousin Priya. My dad's brother Ron. A full table. And somewhere between the ham and the dessert, my mom started talking about a woman she used to know. A friend. Whose son had married someone the family hadn't warmed to. And how the marriage had ended. And how the son had lost touch with his whole family in the process. A story. Just a story. Jasmine looked at me. I looked at my plate. And then my Aunt Linda, who had never in her life filtered a single thought before speaking it, said to Jasmine directly, are you close with your family, sweetie? Because family is so important in a marriage. It really determines whether things last. Jasmine said, my mother is my best friend. My father passed when I was 16. The table went quiet. My Aunt Linda said, oh, I'm sorry. And my mother said nothing. Just picked up her fork. Just kept eating. That was the moment. That was the moment I should have said something. That was the moment any person who loved Jasmine the way I said I loved her would have stood up and said, enough. I didn't. I passed the bread. I changed the subject. I got through dinner. In the parking lot afterward, Jasmine didn't cry. She was past crying about it. She just asked me one question. She said, are you ever going to say something? I didn't answer her for 7 seconds. I counted because I knew I was failing. Then I said, I don't want to make it worse. She nodded, got in the car. She didn't talk to me until we got home. I had been so afraid of losing my family that I had been slowly, quietly handing them Jasmine one piece at a time. I proposed in June, on the exact night I had planned. The restaurant. The ring I'd spent weeks choosing. She said yes before I finished the sentence. She was crying. I was crying. The table next to us clapped. It was perfect for about 14 hours. Because at 9 a.m. the next morning, my mother called. She said, I heard. I said, who told you? She said, Derek. Don't be upset with him. I was upset with him. She said, Marcus, I need you to listen to me. I am not against Jasmine as a person. I am worried about whether she is right for this family. I said, "She is the family." My mother said, "You don't know her the way you think you do." I said, "What does that mean?" She paused for a very long time. Then she said, "Come have coffee with me. Alone. Don't bring her." I went. What my mother said to me that morning changed everything. Not because it was true, but because of how much of it I almost believed. She told me that she had done research. Her word. Research. She said she had talked to someone who knew someone from the city Jasmine had worked in before she moved. That there had been an issue. A professional conflict. Someone had accused Jasmine of taking credit for work that wasn't entirely hers. That the situation had been resolved, but that her reputation in that community had never fully recovered. I sat there. I listened. I felt something cold move through my chest. She wasn't done. She said Jasmine had been engaged before, 2 years before she met me. That it had ended badly. That the man had said she was incapable of compromise. That she always had to win. I said, "Where are you getting this?" She said, "I'm your mother. I look out for you." I said, "Mom, where are you getting this?" She slid a piece of paper across the table. A printout. A LinkedIn message thread. A name I didn't recognize. I picked it up. I read it. I put it down. I didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Then I said, "You contacted someone from her past." She said, "I asked questions." I said, "You went looking for a reason." She said, "I went looking for the truth." I left without drinking my coffee. I drove 35 minutes home at exactly the speed limit with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. And I thought about what I was going to do with what I now knew. Not about Jasmine. About my mother. Here is what actually happened when I told Jasmine. Because I did tell her. That night. All of it. She listened without interrupting. She sat on the edge of the couch with her hands folded in her lap, and she listened to every word. And when I finished, she was very still for a moment. Then she said, "The professional thing. Yeah, that happened. My supervisor at the time put his name on a paper I had written, and when I called it out, the department sided with him because he had tenure and I didn't. I left that job 6 months later. I never told you because it was 3 years ago and I was ashamed, and I didn't want you to think less of me." She paused. She said, "The engagement. His name was Terrence. It lasted 8 months. I ended it because he wanted me to stop working so much, and I wasn't ready to do that. He told people I was difficult because that was easier than saying he couldn't handle an independent woman." She looked at me. She said, "Your mother found a stranger on the internet who gave her the most unflattering version of the things I never told you. And she used it against me. And now you know everything. And I need to know, what are you going to do with it?" I said, "I'm going to marry you." She said, "That's not the hard part, Marcus. The hard part is what you do about your family." But that was nothing compared to the dinner 6 weeks before the wedding. My mom had suggested it. A family dinner. To clear the air. My dad, Derek, Aunt Linda, me and Jasmine. I should have said no. I didn't say no because I was still, even then, trying to build a bridge that my family was standing on one side of with a lighter. We sat down at 6:30 p.m. It was a Thursday. Jasmine wore a black dress. She had done her hair. She had brought wine because she was still, even after everything, trying. For about 40 minutes, it seemed like it might actually work. Derek was warm. My dad made a joke about the wedding venue. Aunt Linda told a story about her own rehearsal dinner that was actually funny. Jasmine laughed. I exhaled. And then my mother said, "Jasmine, I want to ask you something." The table shifted. Everybody felt it. She said, "I want to ask you what your intentions are with my son." Jasmine said, "I'm sorry." My mother said, "You're marrying into a family. This is a commitment to all of us, not just to Marcus. And I think it's fair to ask what you see for your future with us." Jasmine set her fork down. She said, "With respect, you've made it very clear from the first time I met you that you don't consider me family." My mother said, "I don't think that's fair." Jasmine said, "You put my sweet potato pie on the counter and never served it." The table went silent. My dad looked at my mother. Derek looked at his plate. Aunt Linda picked up her wine. My mother said, "That was a misunderstanding." Jasmine said, "You called a stranger to build a case against me." My mother said, "I was protecting my son." And then, my mother reached across the table and put her hand on Jasmine's wrist. Not gently, a grip. She said, "You are not what's best for him. And deep down, I think you know that." The room stopped. Jasmine looked down at my mother's hand on her wrist. Then she looked at me, and I stood up. I said, "Take your hand off her." My mother did not move immediately. She held it for one more second, one defiant, deliberate second, and then she let go. I said, "I am done." My dad said, "Marcus." I said, "No, no. I have watched this for 2 years. I have made excuses for 2 years. I have sat at tables while my future wife was picked apart and cross-examined and humiliated, and I said nothing because I kept thinking it would get better. It has not gotten better. It has gotten worse." My mother said, "You are making a scene." I said, "You grabbed her wrist." My mother's eyes went somewhere I hadn't seen before. Not anger, something closer to grief. She said, "I am trying to save you." I said, "From what?" "From a woman who works hard and loves me and has done nothing to this family except try." "From what, Mom? Say it out loud." She didn't say it out loud. The silence said it for her. Jasmine and I left at 7:14 p.m. I know because I looked at my phone when we got to the car, and I had 3 missed calls from Derek already. I didn't call him back that night. Jasmine didn't speak until we were on the highway. Then she said, "You stood up." I said, "I should have done it 2 years ago." She said, "Yeah, you should have." She wasn't angry. She was something more complicated than angry. She was the person who had watched me fail her over and over and had stayed anyway. And now she was processing the strange grief of finally being defended by someone who should have defended her all along. We got home at 8:22 p.m. She made tea. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about the fact that I was getting married in 6 weeks and my mother might not come. And I didn't know if that was my fault or hers, or if the line between those two things was even real. Derek called me the next morning. He said Mom had been up crying until 2 in the morning. He said Dad was shaken. He said they were both asking whether I would still invite them to the wedding. I said, "The invitation was never retracted. That's their choice." Derek said, "Marcus, she's still your mom." I said, "I know who she is. The question is whether she knows who I am." He said, "What do you want from her?" I said, "An apology. To Jasmine. Not to me. To her." Derek was quiet. Then he said, "I don't know if she can do that." I said, "Then I don't know if she should be there." I was proud of that sentence when I said it. Then I spent the rest of the day feeling like I'd swallowed glass. Here is where it gets complicated. Here is where I have to be honest in a way I wasn't ready to be for a long time. My mother sent a letter. On paper. Handwritten. She put it in the mail the day after the dinner. I got it 4 days later. It was 3 pages long. She talked about her own marriage. How her mother-in-law had never accepted her. How she had spent 15 years trying to be enough for a family that had already decided she wasn't. How the pain of that had never fully left her. She said she had never wanted Jasmine to feel that way. She said she had become the thing she had once hated most. She said she didn't know when it had happened. She said the fear of losing me had turned into something she hadn't recognized until she was already standing inside it. She said the research, the dinner, the grab. She said she was not looking for an excuse. She said she was telling me the truth so that I understood it wasn't about Jasmine. It was never about Jasmine. It was about her. She said she was sorry, specifically to Jasmine. She said she would write to her separately if Jasmine would allow it. I read that letter twice. Then I read it again. I did not know what to do with it. I gave it to Jasmine without comment. She read it at the kitchen table. She read it slowly. When she finished, she folded it along the original creases and set it down. She sat with it for almost 10 minutes. Then she said, "She means it." I said, "I think so too." She said, "That almost makes it worse." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because if she was just cruel, it would be easy. But she's a wounded person who aimed her wounds at me because I was convenient. And now I have to decide whether to forgive somebody who hurt me out of pain instead of malice. And I don't know if those are supposed to feel different." I didn't have an answer. I still don't. My mother came to the wedding. She and Jasmine had a 20-minute conversation before the ceremony that nobody else was present for. I do not know what was said. I have not asked. Jasmine has not volunteered it. Some things belong only to the people who live them. My mother cried during the vows. Not politely. The real kind of crying. The kind that surprises you when it comes out. At the reception, she and Jasmine's mother sat next to each other at the head table. They talked for most of the night. I watched them from across the room at 9:47 p.m. while the band was playing something slow, and I felt something I still can't name. Not joy, not relief. Something that exists in the space between where things were and where they are now. Something that knows the distance between the 2 points. It's been 8 months since the wedding. My mother and Jasmine are not close. They are not enemies. They have had 4 dinners. 3 of them were okay. One of them was hard. My mother still does things that make Jasmine's jaw tighten. Jasmine still does things that make my mother retreat. I am still, some days, the bridge between 2 people who love me and have not fully learned to love each other. I don't know if they ever will. I know that Jasmine waited for me to choose her, and that she waited longer than she should have had to, and that the fact that I eventually did is not the same as the fact that I did it in time. I know that my mother was afraid, and that fear made her into something smaller and sharper than she actually is. I know that I waited too long, that my silence was its own kind of betrayal, that the person I was most afraid of disappointing was me, because if I chose Jasmine loudly, I had to admit I'd chosen wrong by not choosing her loudly sooner. I know all of that now. Here is the question I have not stopped thinking about for 8 months. My mother became the villain of this story, and she earned that. The research, the grip on the wrist, the subtle cruelty at every table. But she was also a woman who had been hurt the same way, who had been on the other side of this exact story, who looked at her son bringing home someone new and felt something break open that she hadn't finished healing from. Does that excuse what she did? No. Does it explain it? Completely. And here's where I need you, because I have been sitting with this question and I cannot reach a conclusion on my own. When someone hurts you out of their own unhealed pain, when they aim their damage at the closest target, are they responsible the same way a person who does it with cold intent is responsible? And if you were Jasmine, if you had been the target of every piece of that, would you have forgiven her? Could you have sat at that table at 9:47 p.m. and watched your husband's mother cry during your vows and felt anything other than the weight of everything that came before? I've been thinking about this for 8 months. I still don't have an answer. Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one.